right, we're going to get started. Just waiting for Brian to come in and make sure the tech works. So, this is going to be a very informal session. So feel free to ask questions. We're splitting it into kind of like the way our week went chronologically. And different people are talking about different things. So if you have any questions about what we're talking about, just ask them at any time. You don't have to wait till the end. So just as a little background, we started doing these trips to El Salvador in, I think, 2007. And we did them every January through 2020, with the exception of 1 year. And then we hadn't been back since 2020. So this is our first time back in 6 years, which made this trip, for some of us, or there are a few people who are repeaters, it was familiar. For a lot of people, it was their first time. But in a way, it was the first time for the whole group because it's been so long since we've been there. And the point of the trip really is to build relationships. So it's to foster mutual understanding and caring. And obviously it has a huge impact on the people who are able to go, but not everyone can go or wants to go. But so it becomes the job of those of us who have been to bring other people into the partnership by sharing our experiences and what we've learned about our partners in El Salvador. So with that, we're going to start with what we did on our first 2 days. Saw some historically significant points in San Salvador, and John Schilling is going to talk about that.
Morning. I'm John Schilling. Just realized I've lost my notes, so bear with me. What I intend to do is give you a brief 2-hour history of El Salvador. Truthfully, to understand El Salvador today, we have to look at El Salvador.
It's on the podium.
The first few days, on my notes, the biggest influence currently of El Salvador is there's basically still recovering from the Civil War. Their Civil War lasted from 1980 to 1992. It was the issues were well before that. Some of the places we saw were we saw some historically significant places. This is the Wall of Memory and Truth. During the Civil War, a number of the government was not the most trustworthy entity, and also they committed atrocities and massacres. The Wall of Memory and Truth has over 26,000 names of people that were massacred or disappeared. Realistically, looking at the numbers of disappeared and killed during that period was probably closer to 90,000 to 100,000. But it's a huge part of their population that just is no more. This particular memorial was suggested by the UN Commission on Truth in 1993, which was the year of the Peace Accord. It's about an 80-yard wall that has over 26,000 names on it. It was dedicated in the year 2003, 10 years after the conflict. It was also worth noting is it was not put up by the government, but by a number of NGOs in the country. Another thing we saw was the cathedral where we visited the museum and the place where Archbishop Romero was martyred. That was a very moving place. Archbishop Romero was killed in March 24th of 1980. He was gunned down during Mass, and he was killed by a government death squad. Okay. Archbishop Romero was a champion of human rights, and he also somewhat reluctantly got into more of a role of speaking out. He did radio messages. Also, his mass was put out on the radio. So he was a voice for hope and moving forward. We then, oh, that's coincident.
I have a picture of the church you're talking about.
Okay.
It's not cooperating.
During our first day, we also went to downtown El Salvador. There was a main plaza, a lovely national palace, and a cathedral. The cathedral is where Archbishop Romero was interred in a crypt in the basement. It's a very, once again, a very moving location, especially when you understand that during his funeral on March 30th of 1980, there were, depends who you ask, there was either 100 or 250,000 people in that main square. And then government troops opened fire from the roof of the main palace, and there were 26 dead and 400 to 600 injured, once again, depending on who you hear. It's generally looked upon that that was the start of the Civil War, because that is the incident that caused the groups to band together against the government. So, not getting into the entire history of all the atrocities during the war, we'll move on to another place where we visited, and that was University of Central America. That was the site where 6 Jesuit priests were killed and 2 women. That was in November of 1989. They were basically brought out of their sleep and executed. Because once again, they were speaking of, they wanted the government to do more negotiating and things like that. So, the 6 Jesuit priests were Spanish citizens, and it's kind of the agreement that this is what started to end the war because of the international outrage. Now, the Lutherans weren't left out of this, because actually on the same day, on November 16th, 1989, the government, the military came to Resurrection Lutheran Church, and they were looking for Bishop Gomez. Unfortunately, Bishop Gomez was coincidentally in Milwaukee at the time, so he was not arrested, but others were. So clergy was a target. That kind of brings us full circle. We see why a war was started, we see why a war was ended, And now we see, we see a government that is trying to take control. It's debatable what they're doing. They have decreased the number of gangs by imprisoning people and taking them off the street, which is now making El Salvador one of the safest places on earth. Unfortunately, they have created a state of emergency since the year 2020, I believe, and basically it's 2022, and basically they have suspended civil rights as we know it. No due process. They can snatch them off the streets. They'll put them in jail and sort them out later. So basically, they have no freedom of speech. So we know what we were told behind closed doors is not something that they could discuss in the street. Which kind of takes me to the end of my spot. But one thing that's really affected me is, for the last 2 weeks I've been in Minnesota, actively protesting out the cold, because I'm using my voice, and I think of the other people around the world who can't. So, thanks.
I'm going to go through the pictures.
No, but go back to the slide with the 6 priests. There are also the woman and the daughter that were.
Yeah, so this depicts the 6 Jesuit priests who were killed, and also killed with them were their housekeeper and their housekeeper's daughter, who sadly were staying there to be safer. The father of the family felt that it was dangerous for them to come back to their rural community because of the death squad, so they decided to bring the daughter also to stay with the mother, because they thought they would be safer at Buca, and it turned out that the death squads came that night, and they were also murdered. They became murdered. So this is the museum at Buca that John was talking about, Presidential Palace, outside Romero's home and the church where he was. This is Romero's very, very, or as an archbishop, very, very humble places that he lived, and that's the church.
Correction, wasn't he killed as he was presiding over communion?
Yes, he was. Actually, I believe it was in the movie. I think he's presiding over communion. In real life, I think it was at the offering time. So that I would have to check that to be sure. If you've ever watched the Romero movie, they change a few little facts like that to make it more dramatic a little bit. But he was killed in the middle of a service. A sniper came in, shot him in the heart, and left. And that's where. So any other questions about? One thing we did find out about, John said there is no freedom of speech. That's it's a little bit qualified. There is what's being restricted now is the ability of nonprofits to speak out against the government. So they're doing that by saying there will be a 30% tax on any money sent to a nonprofit that speaks out against Nayib Bukele. So you can apply for an exemption to that on a yearly basis. So the church has gotten that exemption for 1 year, which is going to be a struggle for them because they have very, very many outspoken leaders, and they have a history of speaking out if the government is doing wrong. So in that sense, there's their freedom of speech in terms of being able to freely proclaim what they wanted, what they had proclaimed before, is being altered, and they're looking for new ways to try to do what they're doing without risking losing that protection.
Kristen, as a fellow traveler, John, thank you for that summary, and maybe one other thing to add is our government at the time of the Civil War was supporting that very violent authoritarian government, and is supporting the government today. And one of my big takeaways was the similarities in authoritarian governments, and then also it shouldn't be lost on any of us that the prison that, I think, 40,000 individuals, CCOT, where 40,000 Salvadorians are there without any due process, was the same prison that our government sent Venezuelans before they were sent back to, Venezuelan immigrants before. And it's a very harsh environment.
It was actually a global situation where in Central America at that time, the United States supported the governments in Guatemala and El Salvador. The Cubans were supporting the rebels, and of course Cuba being a proxy of the Soviet Union, that was, we were against the Soviets then. And then coincidentally in, I believe it was Nicaragua, we were on the side of the Sandinistas, and the Cubans were on side of the government.
Right, so basically our position in South and Central America was directly related to what the position of the Soviet Union was, which didn't always put us in alliance with democratic, fair, open countries. But another thing to understand is there is a history of El Salvador, of oppression in El Salvador for generations. So even when they, after the Civil War, began electing presidents, it was hard to move away from that iron fist kind of control. They made some progress. Actually, when Nayib Bukele was mayor of San Salvador, people thought he was doing good things. I think people had different expectations of him as president. And he has done things that have been good for the people. Libraries, schools, he made education free, public education free. There have been changes that have helped people. And even though it's very heavy-handed treatment of the gangs, where people truly, their civil rights are being indiscriminately challenged, it's never been less violent in San Salvador, which means many people are not living in fear anymore. So like the people who live in San Salvador, some of them appreciate the heavy hand, even though it's not respecting people's rights. So it's a really complicated and sad situation just because of their history, which, like Joy said, there's been some complicity.
Correct me if I'm wrong, the roots of the Civil War, one of them was land reform. 6 families basically owned the country.
Yeah, I don't remember if it was 6 or 12. Do I have to go back in again?
Yep.
And then when they
I don't know if it was 6 or 12, but yeah, their land was basically owned by 12 families, and they were all tied to colonialists.
And even the long story short is when they had to do some redistribution, obviously the people ended up with crappy land.
Right, people kept getting moved from fertile land. Like once they discovered a crop was profitable, people in, the people at the top of society would take over that land and send people off the land to farm something else. And so it's a history of people in rural areas being discriminated against. So, okay, I think we'll move on to our second topic, and that's Hayake, and Astrid was going to talk about that. We're going to see if we can get the pictures to work again.
I think I have it connected, Gretchen. I think.
Hopefully, because I didn't prepare any.
All right,
Oh, you've got it?
I've got it.
Okay. So we're going to, I'll start with that one.
Okay.
I'm just gonna talk about all the slides you switched to.
Yeah.
An interesting thing for me, I actually was like in middle school and high school when all of the stuff was happening that John was talking about, and I knew nothing of it. I grew up in a really rural, well-educated college town, and I learned a lot on this trip, just from really understanding like the history and of Central America, as well as the culture. Yeah, so this is Ponda Vida. This is our partner church, and right when we first got there on day one, after an hour journey kind of up into the mountains of El Salvador, very beautiful country, we had a little service before we went out into the community. And the woman that you're gonna see in the pictures with us is Pastora Emily, and her children, probably as well in some of these pictures, as well as our interpreter. We went and left the church for a little walk. That was quite an adventurous hike for some of us. Through the streets and hills of Hayake to not only see the greenhouse that I talked about during the service, but also to visit some of the homes of the people in the community. So we were, it's part of it was like highway road, and part of it was kind of like dirty gravel, kind of walking through. But here you can see sort of this mix of some of the homes where everything is very clean and well kept, and then like we'll have a dirt floor, but a washing machine, so it's like there is electricity, there is water, there are things like that, but in very humble kind of settings. In this home, there was a woman that had been injured, that Pastor Kevin was able to give a blessing to, and apparently it was also a home that Gretchen had been in 5 years before, where I think maybe this same woman was also sick at that time. But chickens running around, and like a lot of local sustainability. That's one of the things that's really interesting about the greenhouse is just the community aspect and feel of that, to be able to bring water together up to kind of like this higher part, so that the crops can grow, and then the sharing of all of the resources there. At this point, Pastor Emily's son really seemed to be the one that was like taking this project on. He's 20, right, or 19 years old. This is a young man who has already decided that he wants to go to extend his education to be in service, to be in social work, to be in community, and to help other people. This was one of the families that we visited. A lot of multi-generational homes. So this is the grandmother of these two girls, and very often like this kind of middle generation is out working, and the grandparents are taking care of the children at home, while the others are maybe in San Salvador working, staying for the week because the bus trip is probably a little bit long. We had a direct, bus. There's the grandpa too. They were very welcoming to us. We also were able to share a meal with Pastor Emily at Ponda Vida on the first day. These are our tamales. They are in banana leaves instead of in corn husk. But delicious. And in fact, the food just like kept coming. I think I was full after like having this and then a tortilla. They're thicker. So it was quite a bit. And we had beans, and they're very hospitable in giving us that we had chicken and things that we know are kind of like really important for them. They were willing to share that with us.
Could I just interject a minute? Would you like to tell people about the chicken that you had, Grace?
I got served, we kept passing plates of chicken down. The one that landed on my plate was kind of the torso of the chicken. And I'm looking at it and I see like a few yellow balls, and I cut it open and it's an egg yolk. So the egg was still in the chicken. I don't eat eggs, so I did not.
You got the bonus chicken.
Yeah.
Well, then we all learned that there's an egg sack in chickens, and we looked all of these things up, and it's like, it was fresh, and, killed that day for our sustenance. I also don't eat eggs, I'm glad she was at the other end.
I think that was it.
It's the front of the church, and very often, like, it's moving kind of like plastic furniture around. Every space becomes the space that it needs to be for the moment, whether it's for a meal or whether it's for a service. You can see the altar, and I think this is the one that they gave us, right?
They made that for us last year, and then we didn't get a group to go, so they've been displaying it at their church and they gave it to us.
That was in the sanctuary now. And this is the congregation. One of the things that really struck me, and I do think there are probably lots of variables that play into this, is that like men are in the city working, also because of like the timeliness of the war and then gang violence and people disappearing, is kind of this lack of men in just the culture, like maybe around, I would say 35 to 55, 60. A lot of women and children, and this was really the group that the girls were doing the crafts with the students, I sound like a teacher. With the kids, and we just participated throughout the day in the service with them, and then in the craft and a meal.
I don't know if Julie, I think Julie wants to talk about it.
And then, yep, I'm gonna turn it over to you.
Yeah, so she already kind of touched on this in the group. Lots of kids that were just very excited to talk to us. My Spanish is not perfect, but I was one of the better speakers in the group, I guess. And it was fun to talk to the kids because no matter what you were saying, they would laugh at you. And I wish that they were laughing with me, but I think they just like to laugh at us. I'm sure Grace can also attest to this, but at the end of the day, they were still sharing their stories, and I got to talk to one of the girls. Her name was Mirella. She was telling me why she was in El Salvador and kind of how she found Pan de Vida and how they help her every Sunday, and she gets to come with her mom and have a meal, which we also got to share. These are two of the people that were confirmed that Sunday. Pastor Kevin may know a little bit more about this than me, but the confirmation service was slightly different. I believe there was salt involved. I'm not quite sure.
They said, they did put salt on their tongues and read the gospel from today, you are the salt of the earth.
There we go. I did not get that in Spanish, but glad someone understood. More of just the families. There was kind of also a theme of when we were playing with the kids, a lot of the mothers and grandmothers were kind of sitting around the circle, taking a break and talking to each other. Another picture of the confirmation. Yeah. This is the same sign that Gretchen talked about today in service, but it says, "We walk together in unity with the love of God." And then at the bottom, it says like Lutheran Church Pan de Vida and the Lutheran Church San Mateo, which is St. Matthew's. This is the balloon game. We could have. I was very bad at this. I'm not sure why. Essentially, you just had to walk with a balloon in between every person without using your hands.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. The kids may have cheated. But it's okay, because everyone was having fun, and that's what mattered. Except for me at some moments. Same picture of the congregation of the group.
My bad.
More kids having fun. And then we also exchanged friendship bracelets that we had our Sunday school kids here make, and then we gave them to the kids there. And they all seemed to like them. They all tied them on immediately. This is the craft. Essentially, we took tiny, colorful pieces of paper and had them kind of fill in shapes. There was a heart, there was a cross, there was a fish, star, things like that with glue. And they were all very good at it, I would say. It was very difficult to explain, but they all seemed to understand, and then they all kind of helped each other with it. Here you can kind of see, like, the fish was the shape, and then she has the little pieces of paper that she was gluing onto it.
The pieces of paper are from old bulletin covers from St. Matthew's.
Color. Nice.
I think only one kid ate the glue stick.
Yeah,
Really?
I think it was the little kid in orange. He also,
Oh, that little boy.
he took a crayon and kind of tried to fill in the whole page, but, you know, you kind of just had to let him do his thing.
He used a lot of glue.
Yeah, yeah. This is
That's Casa
Casa
Esperanza.
That's Casa Esperanza. That's where they do their laundry and.
Well, I think Grace is gonna talk about Casa
Yeah.
Esperanza.
Yeah, another place we visited was Casa Esperanza, which is in San Salvador, and it provides lunch and laundry and showers, I believe, to people in San Salvador who are homeless. This is someone who works there in the kitchen. We went there and Pastor Emily led a quick devotion, and then we helped serve lunch. We carried a lot of very full bowls of soup. And then we got to spend some time with Pastor Emily and Christian and learn more about Casa Esperanza and some other projects they do. Yeah, they're there in the kitchen cooking the soup. And there's the full bowls of soup. Yeah, and all of the projects that we learned about were, I think, very impactful. And this one was, they had cake. What exactly was the cake, Gloria?
She said that, everybody in our group had in our whole group had a birthday in the previous year, so they had a cake, so it was like a happy birthday for everybody.
Yeah, we all kind of had desserts on our mind the whole week, so this was very exciting. Yeah, but I think Casa Esperanza was a great example of just seeing all of the hard work and love that Pastor Emily puts into her projects. And at the end of the trip, Gretchen asked us to come up with a word that summarized our experience. And the word I came up with was hope. I think projects like this are just a great source of inspiration and seeing all of the great work that great people are doing down there. So, yeah, and then
Can you back up the pictures a little bit to the woman that started Casa Esperanza, the first one?
Is that here?
So this
No.
woman, her name is,
Oh, here.
that woman, her name is Marina, and she came to Casa Esperanza years ago, and she's clearly got some pretty significant physical disabilities, and she was pregnant, so they took her in. She actually had 2 boys, and she and her 2 boys were housed at Casa Esperanza, and they are 2 of the students that we sponsor. And actually, we have a family who sponsored the oldest boy through nursing school. And he just graduated, and he really has formed a relationship with he calls her his godmother, and is in contact with her all the time. And so it's really been a blessing. And she still works there. And her other son's hoping, I think, to be a nurse as well.
Gretchen, I just wanted to say something too about our experience at Casa Esperanza. When we were there after Pastor Emily had a devotion, then they sent around, and I think all of us were like shocked, but they sent around a collection plate. And here, you know, you have the poorest of poor people that are taking advantage of a free meal, and these people were putting money into the collection plate. It was, you know, it was amazing, and our group talked about it afterwards, and, you know, we really kind of came to the conclusion, or came to that, you know, this gave them some dignity to be able to contribute to something and to be valued, and it was a meaningful thing for them to donate this little bit of change that they had. But like I said, when this collection plate started around, we were kind of like, you know, wow, what is happening here? And it was pretty amazing. That really has stayed with me, that part of it. So.
Any other questions or thoughts about Casa Esperanza?
How are Americans in general received down there? Or does it depend on?
It depends on the group that you talk to. I think like the government loves to have Americans come there, and they would like to be a tourist spot. They're trying to appeal to people like who might be vacationing. People in the church understand that we are not who they thought we were during the war. I've heard multiple stories from people in the church that once they got to know us as people, they realized we were different people. We were different from what they thought we were based on our government's actions. But we're very welcome in the churches. And I've never really felt a sense of being like rejected or had negative thoughts or negative reactions, even just walking on the street.
What percentage of your Christian population is Lutheran as opposed to Catholic or others?
I don't know the exact percentage, but I know Catholics are first, Pentecostals are second, and then Lutherans and others are.
And Pentecostals are growing fast. Pentecostal is growing.
And the Pentecostals are growing fast. It's not unthought of that they might someday catch up to or outstrip Catholics. All right, we have a video for Las Magnolias, and then do you want to cover the synod meetings with the bishop?
Sure.
Okay. So we have a video from Annabelle about Las Magnolias where we stayed.
Thanks.
Hola! Sorry I can't be with you all in person. I'm a student at the university, and coming back to Wisconsin for this weekend just didn't work out.
Let me stand up closer.
Or this past June. Specifically, I'm going to talk about staying at the Las Magnolias guest house with our wonderful host, Christian. The Las Magnolias property was beautiful. It had spectacular views of San Salvador and plenty of outdoor space for us to utilize. The patios quickly became our favorite place to gather and debrief at the end of the long day. Christian is very involved in the church and the community. He lives at Las Magnolias with his partner Aldo, and they frequently host groups very similar to ours. Christian and Aldo pride themselves on taking care of their guests. All of the food was safely prepared and served, so we never had to worry about getting sick. They were extremely accommodating of our schedules, and there was plenty of space for us to spread out. Considering Christian and Aldo continue to live there while hosting guests, we were fortunate enough to foster a really great friendship with them both. Christian even shared some very personal stories from his childhood, experience with the war, and recent projects he's taking on. They aren't my stories to share, but I speak for all of us when I say that it was an honor that he felt safe enough and trusted all of us to confide his deeply personal testimonies. The point of these trips is to not travel in luxury. So I almost feel guilty with how incredible our accommodations were. But Christian, Aldo, and the Las Magnolias property provided us the perfect home base to return to each day. And having that safe space made all the difference. Our days were long, inspiring, eye-opening, but sometimes difficult. But knowing we could come home each night and unwind with a warm meal and welcoming people truly made a difference. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for me. It was a part of the world I had never been to before, and it changed my perspective on faith, mental health, sustainability, and community. It is a trip I would say yes to time and time again.
That was a really good summary of like the feel of the trip, especially the accommodations and the relationships that we built. I don't know if talking about being in the Synod office may elicit the same degree of like excitement as like sunsets, but it was really exciting to be there too. So this is a neat opportunity where we were able to hear not what was just happening congregationally, like what is happening at Ponte Vita in the community of Hayape and the, like for instance, the garden that they're creating, but what are like kind of some larger efforts congregationally, or like, you know, as a church in El Salvador. And for instance, I would imagine, like I never asked this, that, so this is the Synod office that we're in, that they, that some of, like the idea of having a garden might have emerged from some of the initiatives that were being focused on. So this lady standing right here is the bishop, and like by all accounts, like her baby is like the environmental project they have, with like a coffee project. Like she would, I think she was happy to be with us, but she would have been much happier tending to her coffee plants than hanging out with us. And like that's kind of like was a running joke. It's like, well, where's the bishop? She's probably out at Ilopango at the environmental project. So that kind of, you can see that spirit has kind of permeated the church more broadly. And if we go back to the other picture where you can see the door frame, so the woman to my right, the far left, does a lot of the, I can remember right, does a lot of the like training and pastoral formation. Like the room we were in is both in the Synod office, and it was also kind of like a seminary classroom. So there's a lot of both formation for building up pastors, but just a lot of other like kind of educational, formational opportunities that are more or less in-house. So there's just a lot of neat initiatives, you know, around like various justice causes, around environmental causes, around kind of formation. So basically, like everything that's happening, like in like the church infrastructure, is happening in one of these rooms, and they have a beautiful wall of plants I was admiring that I think even cost one of the colleagues there their leg. He broke his leg while falling off the ladder, and he was like, "Oh yeah, it healed, and I was back doing it again." So I was like, "You're braver and tougher than I am." But also on that wall, we could see some of the other partners. They have their partners with us here in the Greater Milwaukee Synod, but they have other partnerships in the United States and also globally. The Lutherans in Bavaria got a big shout out on that wall as well. Some of the key like founders or like international original partners were a couple of gentlemen from Germany, if I'm not mistaken, right? They probably have that Bavarian connection.
They've had a long connection with the two churches.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's another one. They have a number of partners, but the Bavarian church got the biggest shout out on the wall of plans. Did I miss any of the like main details we want to lift up from that gathering?
Can I
Yes.
just point out, I know who he is, but to tie in with the artists and where you stayed and who the guy is on the right.
Yeah, so that's, okay, well, the gentleman on the far right of the picture, the other guy besides me, that's Christian, the artist, that if you were in the first service, you saw the Lund cross, that's his work. And if you heard of Christian Aldo, for instance, in the video a second ago from Annabelle, we stayed at his house. He's a wonderful guy, and as a little plug, by all counts, the plan is for him to be here for Synod Assembly this year. So if you want to meet him in May, and the bishop, they'll be here in May. high schoolers, some high schoolers, he will be leading a cross painting in his style workshop. So some of you can maybe pretend to be high schoolers. If you're, if you want to learn more about that. Bishop Paul yesterday referenced it being focused on high schoolers. Maybe we could try and twist Christian's arm to making it a little bit broader. But I know at least high schoolers, maybe more than high schoolers, but definitely high schoolers will be doing it.
And also point out that he's a pastor.
Yes.
Yeah, he's a pastor and he's actually head of the Office of Partnership Parish. So when you are, like, you have an issue with the partnership or you're planning a trip, he's the guy. And he speaks fluent English, so that makes it pretty handy to be a partnership parish person.
And it's convenient too. We're saying, hey, where do we stay? He's like, well, you can literally stay at my house. Makes it more convenient for logistics as well.
And Bishop Gomez, is the new bishop the daughter of Bishop Gomez or no?
No.
Bishop Gomez was the previous bishop. And his daughter works in the synod office. So these are like bishop and then various synod staff. Bishop Gomez's daughter, Elizabeth Gomez, is one of the other members of the synod staff. She was not present with us that day. So she's not in that picture, but she's kind of in that crew.
She's also on the council of five people. I can't remember the name of that council now. She ran for bishop and did not get elected. And there was a little politics over that. She wasn't always a pastor. She became a pastor when her father got closer to retirement. So there was a little bit of tension, but Guadalupe, who's been a very solid pastor for a long time, was elected pretty handily. So we did not meet, or Spade did not meet with us that day.
Any other questions for me? Cool. Anything else? I'll pass it back to you, Gretchen.
The only other thing I want to say is that one thing that Pastor Emily really puts a high priority on is trying to strengthen their scholarship program. And there are about 39 kids, I think a total of, if all of them were supported, it would be a total of $16,000 a year because there's various levels. And those scholarships go to families who have limited resources. The kids are required to be in school and have proof of being good students, etc. There's transparency with the program. But it's about, I think it's about 400 for elementary school, 600 maybe for high school, and then college it's about 1,500. I didn't bring that, I forgot to bring that sheet in here with me, so I don't have the exact numbers, but it can make a difference in their lives. Because in addition to just like basic school stuff that the government might cover, they have to take, especially secondary students, they have to take the bus to San Salvador. And there's a cost there, they might have to stay somewhere in San Salvador. Did you have a question?
That's what I was gonna ask, because I think earlier you said that the president had made education free, but that what we're talking about when we talk about our scholarship program is all the other costs, like a uniform, or school supplies, or a backpack, or the cost for the bus, or those
cost for the bus, and even to some, so for public schools, it's free. And uniforms, I believe they cover a couple of uniforms per year too at public schools. Sometimes the public schools aren't the best schools, so some of the kids, it used to be for safety reasons, would go to a private school, and that's not covered. But like you said, there are other expenses, school supplies, transportation, food, and if they are going far away, they need to bring food with them. And just a lot of times the families just in general struggle. So sometimes kids will drop out of school to help the family, so it's a way to kind of keep kids in school.
Could you speak to what else our church is contributing to in terms of the life of,
Yeah, what our church does through the foundation, the St. Matthew's Foundation, is we give money each year to our partnership in Tanzania and our partnership in El Salvador. The money that we send to El Salvador always goes to Casa Esperanza. This year it was $7,000. Last year we upped it a little bit to $9,000 because they had to close their doors and were operating only 1 to 2 days a week instead of 4 days. So that's an ongoing support, and then we support projects as needed, and sometimes they'll ask for special needs. So the scholarship program would be the biggest program right now. And we are gonna be emphasizing that. We're gonna be doing some work on that, this spring to make it more accessible to people. So I think it's about time for us to tie up a little bit past maybe, but, thank you for listening, and, all of us who went, anybody who went on the trip, stand up maybe. So memorize their faces if you have any questions. They'd be happy to share more about their experiences, and maybe you'd like to go next year.